The sun had barely risen over the towers of Mercy General Hospital as Lin Yu adjusted her badge and stepped into the intensive care unit for her morning shift. At 26, she was one of the younger nurses on the floor, but what she lacked in experience she made up for with genuine care and attention to detail. The hospital corridors were quiet at this early hour, with only the steady beeping of machines and the soft footsteps of the night shift preparing to leave. "Morning." Denise, Lynn greeted the night nurse with a tired smile. "How's Mr. Thornton doing today?" Denise glanced at the patient chart and shrugged. "Same as yesterday and the day before that. No changes." "It's been exactly 3 months now." Lynn nodded, her eyes drifting to the still figure in the hospital bed. Alexander Thornton was a man who had once commanded attention in every room he entered. The real estate mogul's face had been splashed across business magazines and local newspapers for years. Now he lay motionless, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that kept his body functioning, while his mind remained locked away in a coma following a terrible car crash. "I'll take it from here," Lynn said, accepting the chart and scanning the night's notes. "Family visit today?" Denise asked, gathering her things. Lynn shook her head. "No one's scheduled. Actually, no one's been here all week." This wasn't unusual. Despite Mr. Thornton's wealth and status, visitors were rare. Lynn had pieced together from conversations with other staff and the occasional news article that Mr. Thornton was something of a loner. His parents had passed away years ago, and he had no siblings or children. His ex-wife had remarried and moved abroad. The only regular visitor was his lawyer, who came by once a month to check on his client's condition and ensure the hefty medical bills were being paid from Thornton's accounts. After Denise left, Lynn began her morning routine. She checked the monitors, recorded vital signs, and prepared for the doctor's rounds. When those were complete, it was time for Mr. Thornton's bath. "Good morning, Mr. Thornton," Lynn said as she carefully moved around his room gathering supplies. "It's Tuesday, May 16th. It rained last night, but it's clearing up now. Looks like it might be a nice day." Lynn always talked to her comatose patients. She'd read studies suggesting that some people in comas could hear what was happening around them, and she believed that human connection was an important part of healing. With Mr. Thornton, who had so few visitors, she made extra effort. "I'm going to give you your bath now," she explained, gently pulling back his covers. "The water's nice and warm." As she worked, Lynn continued to chat, telling Mr. Thornton about a funny incident with her roommate's cat, the new coffee shop that had opened across from the hospital, and her younger brother's recent acceptance to engineering school. Her voice remained gentle and conversational as she carefully washed his arms, chest, and legs with practiced efficiency and respect. "My brother nearly fell over when he got the letter," Lynn said as she rinsed the soap from Mr. Thornton's arm. "My parents were crying. They came to this country with almost nothing, you know. Now their son is going to be an engineer. They worked in factories and cleaned houses so we could have opportunities they never had." She paused to adjust the water temperature. "I sometimes wonder if that's why I became a nurse. To help people, yes, but also to make their sacrifice worth it. Though I still have my own dream, too." Lynn moved to wash Mr. Thornton's face, her touch especially gentle around the breathing tube. "I want to open a clinic someday. Back in my hometown. It's a small place, and people have to drive almost an hour to see a doctor. The elderly folks especially struggle with that. I think about my grandpa before he passed away. The care he could have received if there had been better access." As Lynn spoke, she noticed something she'd seen before. Mr. Thornton's heart rate on the monitor had settled into a calm, steady rhythm. Dr. Powell had said it was probably coincidence, but Lynn wasn't so sure. She had noticed that when she talked to him, especially during his baths, his vital signs seemed to stabilize. "The other nurses tease me, you know," she admitted with a small laugh as she finished washing his face. "They call you the sleeping millionaire, and me your personal storyteller. Nurse Kelly says I should ask for a raise since I'm practically your private nurse. But I don't mind. Everyone deserves someone to talk to them." Lynn started to carefully wash Mr. Thornton's hair, supporting his head with one hand. "I read somewhere that you built your first apartment building when you were 30. That's pretty impressive. I'm 26 and the most I've built is a really wobbly bookshelf from the discount store." As she rinsed his hair, making sure no water ran into his ears, she continued, "I wonder what made you get into real estate. Was it something you always wanted to do? Or did you just fall into it? I guess we all end up on paths we don't expect sometimes." After finishing the bath, Lynn dried Mr. Thornton carefully and began changing his hospital gown. It was during this routine task that she first shared her clinic dream with him in more detail. The town's grown since I was a kid, but the medical services haven't kept up. People like my Uncle Juan put off getting help because of the drive. By the time he finally went in, his diabetes was already causing serious problems. A local clinic could have caught that early. Lynn adjusted Mr. Thornton's position to prevent bed sores, propping him with pillows as she continued talking. I've been saving up, but opening a clinic costs a fortune. Land, building, equipment, staff. It'll probably take me 20 years to save enough, and that's if nothing goes wrong. But I'm determined. One day I'll make it happen. She moved around to check the IV, making sure everything was flowing properly. Sometimes I think about approaching investors, but I wouldn't even know where to begin. Plus, who would invest in a small-town clinic? It's not exactly a money-making business. It's more about the service to the community. Lynn recorded the latest readings from the monitors and adjusted the blinds to let in some morning sunlight. You probably made better investment choices, huh? The news said you own half the waterfront now. I can't even imagine that kind of success. Her morning tasks complete, Lynn gathered her supplies and prepared to move on to her next patient. I'll be back to check on you in a bit. Mr. Thornton, the physical therapist will be in soon to work on your muscle tone. And later, if I have time during my break, maybe I'll read a bit more of that book we started last week. Lynn paused at the door, looking back at the still figure in the bed. Despite the tubes and medical equipment, there was something dignified about Alexander Thornton. His silver-streaked dark hair and strong jawline hinted at the commanding presence he must have had before the accident. You know, Mr. Thornton, I believe you can hear me. Maybe not every word, and maybe you won't remember when you wake up. But I think somewhere in there you're listening. And I think everybody needs someone to listen to them sometimes. Even people who seem to have everything. With that, Lynn left the room, unaware that the connection she felt wasn't just her imagination. Unaware that the simple act of treating a wealthy, powerful man with the same compassion and respect she showed all her patients would soon change both their lives in ways she could never have predicted. As days turned into weeks, Lynn's shifts caring for Alexander Thornton became the most peaceful part of her often hectic schedule. Each morning she looked forward to the quiet hour when she could tend to him without interruption. The rhythm of their time together felt almost like a conversation, even though the words flowed in only one direction. Good morning. Mr. Thornton, Lynn said one misty Monday in June as she entered his private room. It's a bit gloomy outside today, but the weather app says it'll clear up by afternoon. The familiar beeping of machines greeted her as she set down her supplies and moved to open the blinds. Soft gray light filtered through the windows, casting gentle shadows across the room. You've got Dr. Rivera checking in today instead of Dr. Powell. She's new, but really good, very thorough. Lynn checked his vital signs, noting them in his chart. His condition remained stable, unchanged for over 4 months now. The doctors had begun using words like persistent vegetative state in their discussions, though they hadn't officially changed his diagnosis yet. Let's get you freshened up before the doctor arrives, she said, preparing the basin of warm water for his morning bath. As she worked, Lynn found herself sharing more personal stories with Mr. Thornton than she did with most of her conscious patients. There was something about his silent presence that made it easy to talk. My mom called last night, she told him as she gently washed his arm. She's worried about me working so many night shifts. Says I need more sunlight or I'll fade away. Lynn laughed softly. She still treats me like I'm 16 sometimes, not 26 with a nursing degree. The routine of caring for him had become second nature, checking the tubes and wires, adjusting his position to prevent bed sores, keeping his skin clean and moisturized, exercises to maintain muscle tone. But Lynn never allowed herself to become mechanical in her care. She handled him with dignity, explaining each step as if he could understand. Time to turn you onto your side now, she said, carefully shifting his weight. There we go. Much better. While performing these tasks, she often told him about her life outside the hospital walls, her tiny apartment with the noisy radiator, her collection of houseplants that somehow thrived despite her erratic schedule, the novel she was reading, or the documentary that had kept her up too late the night before. I watched this fascinating show about deep-sea creatures last night, she said as she combed his hair. There are fish down there that create their own light. Bioluminescence, they called it. Imagine living in total darkness and having the ability to light up whenever you need to see. Nature is pretty incredible. Some days she shared deeper thoughts and dreams, finding it therapeutic to voice her hopes to someone who wouldn't judge or dismiss them. I actually sketched out some plans for the clinic last weekend, she admitted one morning. Just rough ideas, nothing fancy. I was thinking it would need at least 4 exam rooms, a small lab for basic tests, and a welcoming waiting area. Nothing too clinical looking, more warm and inviting, you know? People in small towns get nervous enough about seeing doctors. She rinsed a washcloth in the basin and continued her gentle care. The lot I've been eyeing is right on Main Street next to the old pharmacy. Perfect location. The building there now is pretty run down, but the structure is solid. It would need a complete renovation, of course. Lynn sighed as she adjusted Mr. Thornton's pillows. Then I looked up property prices and nearly choked on my coffee. Even in a small town, commercial real estate isn't cheap. At the rate I'm saving, I'll be retirement age before I can afford it. The nurse's station buzzed her pager, indicating another patient needed attention. Lynn quickly finished up, promising to return later. Throughout that day, Lynn rushed between patients, dealing with the usual chaos of a busy hospital floor. A new admission with complicated needs, a patient whose pain medication wasn't working, family members with endless questions, and the constant documentation that consumed so much of a nurse's time. During her lunch break, rather than joining the other nurses in the cafeteria, she returned to Mr. Thornton's room with her sandwich and a dog-eared paperback. "Hope you don't mind some company," she said, settling into the chair beside his bed. "It's a bit wild out there today." She ate quickly, then opened the book, a mystery novel her brother had recommended. For the next 15 minutes, she read aloud, occasionally pausing to comment on the story. "The detective is definitely missing something here," she remarked. "I think the neighbor knows more than she's saying, don't you?" Lynn had started reading to Mr. Thornton about a month into his stay. Initially just a few news headlines or articles she thought might interest a businessman like him. Over time, it evolved into sharing books she enjoyed. The doctors had encouraged this, explaining that familiar voices and stimulation could potentially help coma patients. What Lynn didn't tell her colleagues was that she sometimes noticed subtle changes when she read to him, a slight variation in his breathing pattern or the occasional flutter of movement beneath his eyelids. Nothing definitive enough to report, but enough to keep her hope alive that somewhere inside he was still present. As June turned to July, the hospital became short-staffed due to summer vacations. Lynn picked up extra shifts, often spending more hours with Mr. Thornton than anyone else. She became fiercely protective of his care, noticing immediately if something was out of place when she entered his room. "Looks like the night shift forgot to turn you," she observed one morning, finding him in the same position she'd left him in the previous evening. "We can't have that. No wonder your oxygen levels are a bit low." After adjusting him and checking his vital signs, she noticed a small pressure mark forming on his heel. "This won't do at all," she murmured, carefully examining the spot and applying a protective dressing. "I'll make a note for everyone to be more vigilant." The other nurses had begun calling Mr. Thornton Lynn's patient, sometimes with a teasing smile. "How's your sleeping millionaire today?" Nurse Patel asked one afternoon at shift change. "His name is Mr. Thornton," Lynn corrected gently, "and he's stable. His blood work came back with improved kidney function." "You're very dedicated to him," Nurse Patel observed. "More than most would be for a patient who may never wake up." Lynn shrugged. Every patient deserves good care whether they're aware of it or not. What she didn't say was how much she had come to look forward to her time with him. The peaceful moments when she could work without rush, the comfort of talking to someone who simply listened without interruption or judgment. In the chaos of hospital life, those quiet hours had become a kind of sanctuary. One rainy evening in late July, Lynn arrived for her shift to find Dr. Rivera reviewing Mr. Thornton's chart. "Any changes?" Lynn asked hopefully. The doctor shook her head. "His physical condition is remarkably stable for someone who's been comatose this long. His body is healing, but there's still no significant brain activity indicating he'll regain consciousness." Lynn's heart sank. "It's only been 5 months," she said. "I've read cases where people woke up after years." "Those are rare exceptions," Dr. Rivera said kindly, "and often with limited cognitive function. His lawyer was here today discussing long-term care options. They're considering moving him to a specialized facility. The thought of Mr. Thornton being transferred elsewhere left Lynn with an unexpected hollow feeling. She had become so accustomed to caring for him, to sharing her thoughts and dreams with him. The idea that someone else would be bathing him, turning him, talking to him, or worse, not talking to him, bothered her more than she wanted to admit. That night, as she performed his evening care routine, Lynn found herself speaking more earnestly than usual. "I heard they might move you to another facility," she said as she checked his IV. "Somewhere that specializes in long-term coma care. It would probably be good for you. They'd have more resources, special equipment." She adjusted his blanket, smoothing out the wrinkles. "But I have to admit, I'd miss our talks. As one-sided as they are," she smiled sadly. "I've probably told you more about myself than I've told most of my friends. Weird how that works, isn't it? Sometimes it's easier to open up when you don't have to worry about the other person's reaction." Lynn moved to the window, looking out at the rain streaking down the glass. The city lights blurred into colorful smudges in the darkness. "I hope wherever they send you, someone talks to you, really talks to you. Not just about your medication or your vital signs. You deserve that." She turned back to look at his still form. "Your vital signs always seemed steadier when we talked. I noticed that right away. The other nurses thought I was imagining things, but I've been doing this long enough to know when something's different." Lynn checked her watch and realized her break was nearly over. She needed to check on her other patients. "I'd better go, but I'll be back before my shift ends." She paused at the door. "And Mr. Thornton, if you can hear me at all, I hope you know that you've mattered to someone here, that you weren't just another patient to me." As she walked down the corridor, Lynn didn't notice the slight increase in brain activity on Mr. Thornton's monitor. A small but significant change that would have told her that perhaps, in his silent world, he was indeed listening. Sunday mornings at Mercy General Hospital were usually quieter than the rest of the week. Fewer doctors made rounds, scheduled procedures were rare, and a peaceful hush fell over the normally bustling corridors. For Lynn, these tranquil shifts were a welcome change from the weekday chaos. This particular Sunday in August dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the windows as Lynn made her way to Alexander Thornton's room for his morning care. She had volunteered for the weekend shift, knowing that plans to transfer him to a long-term care facility were moving forward. Each day now felt precious, knowing their routine would soon come to an end. "Good morning, Mr. Thornton," Lynn greeted as she entered, setting down her supplies on the bedside table. "It's a beautiful day out there. The kind that makes you want to sit in a park and do nothing but watch the clouds." She moved around the room with practiced ease, checking monitors and recording his vital signs before preparing for his bath. Everything was stable, as it had been for the past 97 days. "My brother called last night," she said as she adjusted the water temperature. "Remember I told you he was accepted to the engineering program? Well, he got a scholarship too. A full ride." Her voice filled with pride. "My parents are over the moon. They're planning this huge celebration next weekend. The whole family's coming, even my aunt from California." Lynn carefully removed Mr. Thornton's hospital gown and began the bathing process, her movements gentle but efficient. "He's the first in our family to go to university straight from high school. I did community college first, then transferred. But Liam, he's always been the smart one. Barely had to study and still got perfect grades." She continued talking as she washed his chest and arms, describing the celebration plans in detail. Her mother's elaborate cooking preparations, her father's proud phone calls to relatives, the special gift she had bought for her brother. "I found this vintage calculator watch from the 80s. He collects old tech stuff. Cost me nearly a whole paycheck, but you should have seen his face when he opened it. Worth every penny." As Lynn moved to wash his left arm, she was focused on her story, not immediately registering the slight tension in the muscles beneath her fingertips. It wasn't until she was rinsing away the soap that she noticed something extraordinary. The fingers on Mr. Thornton's left hand twitched. Lynn froze, her heart suddenly pounding. She'd seen random muscle spasms before in comatose patients. They didn't necessarily mean anything, but this movement had seemed different somehow, more coordinated. "Mr. Thornton," she said softly, watching his hand carefully. "Can you hear me?" Nothing happened for several long seconds. Lynn was about to continue with the bath, telling herself not to get excited over a reflexive movement when his fingers twitched again. This time there was no mistaking it. They curled slightly inward as if trying to make a fist. "Mr. Thornton?" Lynn said more urgently. setting down the washcloth and taking his hand in hers. "If you can hear me, try to squeeze my hand." The pressure was faint, so faint she might have imagined it if she hadn't been watching his fingers move. But it was definitely there, a weak but deliberate squeeze. "Oh my God," she whispered, her free hand automatically reaching for the call button. "Mr. Thornton, can you do that again?" Another squeeze, slightly stronger this time. Lynn pressed the emergency call button, her eyes never leaving his face. "Mr. Thornton, if you can hear me, I need you to try something else. Can you try to open your eyes?" At first, nothing happened. Then she noticed a flutter, the almost imperceptible movement of eyelids that hadn't opened in over 3 months. "That's it," she encouraged, squeezing his hand in return. "You can do it. Try again." The room door opened as a nurse rushed in. "What's happening?" "Get Dr. Wei immediately," Lynn said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I think he's waking up." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. The on-call neurologist arrived, followed by 2 more nurses. They surrounded the bed as Lynn explained what had happened, still holding Mr. Thornton's hand. "His GCS score was a 6 yesterday," Dr. Wei said, shining a penlight into Mr. Thornton's eyes. "Any other movements besides the hand?" "Not that I've seen," Lynn replied. "But he definitely squeezed my hand twice, and his eyelids were fluttering." As if hearing her description, Mr. Thornton's eyelids fluttered again, more pronounced this time. The room fell silent as everyone watched, hardly daring to breathe. Then, with what seemed like tremendous effort, his eyes opened. Just a sliver at first, then a bit wider. "Mr. Thornton?" Dr. Wei said clearly, leaning into his field of vision. "My name is Dr. Wei. You're at Mercy General Hospital. Can you hear me?" Alexander Thornton's eyes moved slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually shifting toward the sound of the doctor's voice. His gaze drifted across the faces surrounding him, seeming confused and disoriented, until his eyes found Lynn. In that moment, something changed in his expression. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Mr. Thornton, can you blink if you understand me?" Dr. Wei asked. His eyes remained fixed on Lynn, but he blinked once, deliberately. "Amazing," Dr. Wei murmured. "I want a full set of neurological tests. Page Dr. Rivera and prep for an emergency MRI." As the room burst into activity, Lynn tried to step back to let the medical team work, but Mr. Thornton's fingers tightened around hers with surprising strength. His eyes, still fixed on her face, held something that looked almost like recognition. "It's okay," Lynn said softly to him. "These doctors need to examine you. I'll stay close by." His grip relaxed slightly, allowing her to slip her hand free. But his eyes followed her as she moved to the side of the room. The next hour was a whirlwind of tests and examinations. Lynn was eventually asked to step out, while they prepared to transport Mr. Thornton for brain imaging. She used the time to call her supervisor and update the patient records, her hands still shaking with excitement and disbelief. When Mr. Thornton returned from his MRI, Lynn was allowed back in the room. Dr. Rivera was there, reviewing the initial results with Dr. Wei. "It's remarkable," Dr. Rivera was saying. "The brain activity has increased dramatically in the last few hours. There are still affected areas, but the overall pattern suggests—" She stopped when she noticed Lynn. "Ah, Nurse Yu. Mr. Thornton has been asking for you. Well, not verbally yet, but he's been quite insistent in his own way." Lynn moved closer to the bed. Mr. Thornton's eyes were closed again, but they opened as soon as she approached. The breathing tube had been removed and replaced with a nasal cannula. His lips moved, trying to form words, but no sound came out. "Don't try to talk yet," Lynn advised gently. "Your throat will be sore from the breathing tube. You've been in a coma for more than 3 months. His eyes widened slightly at this information. He lifted his hand a few inches off the bed, a monumental effort, and reached toward her. Lynn hesitated, aware of the doctors observing, then took his hand. "I'm here." Mr. Thornton's lips moved again. This time Lynn leaned closer, trying to understand. "Voice," he whispered, the word barely audible, his voice hoarse from disuse. "My voice?" Lynn asked, confused. He nodded weakly, his eyes never leaving her face. "I don't understand," Lynn said, looking to the doctors for help. Dr. Rivera stepped forward. "Mr. Thornton, were you able to hear while you were in the coma?" Another weak nod. "Could you hear Nurse Yu speaking to you?" A more emphatic nod, his fingers tightening around Lynn's. Me. Here, he whispered, each word clearly taking enormous effort. Lynn felt tears spring to her eyes as the meaning dawned on her. All those hours of one-sided conversations, the stories she'd told, the books she'd read, he'd heard them. Maybe not every word, but enough. I need to examine him further, Dr. Wei said quietly to Lynn, and he needs rest. The next 24 hours will be critical in determining his prognosis. Lynn nodded, understanding she needed to step back and let them work. She gently tried to withdraw her hand, but Mr. Thornton held on, his expression suddenly anxious. Stay, he whispered. I'll come back, Lynn promised. I have other patients to check on, but I'll return soon. You need to rest and let the doctors help you. He seemed to accept this, reluctantly letting go of her hand. His eyes followed her all the way to the door. In the hallway, Lynn leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths to calm herself. In 5 years of nursing, she'd never experienced anything like this. Patients waking from comas wasn't unheard of, but the apparent recognition, the connection, that was different. Dr. Rivera joined her a few minutes later. His cognitive functions appear remarkably intact, she said. It's too early to make any definitive prognosis, but the signs are encouraging. He seems to have some memory of his time in the coma, particularly of your interactions with him. Is that common? Lynn asked. Not common, no, but not unheard of either. Some coma patients report fragmented memories upon waking, voices, conversations, sensations. In Mr. Thornton's case, it seems your voice may have been a consistent presence he could hold on to. Lynn thought of all the things she'd shared with him, believing he couldn't really hear, her dreams, her family stories, her frustrations. The idea that he might remember them made her feel suddenly vulnerable. Will he recover fully? She asked, changing the subject. It's too early to say, Dr. Rivera replied. The fact that he's responsive and appears to have some memory function is extremely positive. But he has a long road ahead. The hospital transformed overnight from a place of quiet routine to buzzing excitement. News of Alexander Thornton's miraculous awakening spread quickly through the staff, with many calling it the most remarkable recovery they'd witnessed in years. For Lynn, the days that followed were a strange mix of professional duty and personal wonder as she watched the wealthy businessman slowly reclaim his life. By Wednesday morning, 3 days after opening his eyes, Mr. Thornton had graduated from single words to short sentences. His voice remained raspy but grew stronger with each passing day. Physical therapists visited twice daily, working to combat the muscle atrophy from months of immobility. The breathing tube had left his throat raw, making swallowing difficult, so he remained on IV nutrition with small amounts of pureed food introduced gradually. Despite these challenges, his cognitive abilities amazed the medical team. Dr. Rivera had explained that brain injuries often resulted in memory loss, confusion, or personality changes. Yet Mr. Thornton displayed remarkable mental clarity, especially about events before his accident. How are you feeling today? Lynn asked as she entered his room for her morning shift. The head of his bed was elevated, allowing him to look out the window at the city skyline. Better, he said, turning to look at her with those intense eyes that still startled her with their awareness. Still weak, frustrating. Lynn nodded as she checked his vitals. That's normal. Your muscles haven't been used in 3 months. It's going to take time. Time, he repeated thoughtfully. Plenty of that now. As Lynn recorded his blood pressure, Mr. Thornton watched her movements carefully. She'd grown accustomed to his scrutiny over the past few days, the way his eyes followed her around the room, observing everything she did with keen interest. You told me about your brother, he said suddenly, his voice still rough but stronger than the day before. Lynn paused, looking up from the chart. My brother? College, engineering, scholarship. Each word seemed to require effort, but his determination was clear. Sunday morning. When I woke up, a chill ran down Lynn's spine. She had indeed been telling him about her brother's scholarship just before he showed signs of consciousness. You remember that? He nodded. Not just Sunday. Before too? Many days. He swallowed with difficulty, and Lynn quickly offered him water through a straw. After taking a sip, he continued. You read books, talked about your hometown. No doctor there. Lynn felt her cheeks warm. Over the months, she'd shared so many personal things, never truly believing he could hear or would remember. The doctors say some coma patients can hear what's happening around them, she said, trying to sound professional. It was worth trying just in case. It helped, Mr. Thornton said simply. Your voice anchor when everything else floating away. He made a drifting gesture with his hand. Before Lynn could respond, the door opened and a tall woman in an expensive suit walked in, followed by a younger man carrying a briefcase. Mr. Thornton, the woman said, her face breaking into a relieved smile. It's wonderful to see you awake. Lynn recognized her as Patricia Wang, Mr. Thornton's lawyer, who had visited monthly to check on his condition. I'll give you privacy, Lynn said, gathering her things. No, Mr. Thornton said firmly, surprising everyone with his sudden assertiveness. Stay, please. Lynn stays. The lawyer looked confused but nodded. Of course. Whatever makes you comfortable, Alex. Lynn moved to the side of the room, feeling awkward but unwilling to upset her patient by leaving. I've brought financial reports and some legal matters that have accumulated, Ms. Wang said, gesturing for her assistant to open the briefcase. Nothing urgent, but I thought you might want to be updated. Later, Mr. Thornton said, waving his hand dismissively. First, tell me about the accident. Ms. Wang glanced at Lynn, then back to her client. Are you sure you want to discuss this now? Need to know, he insisted. The lawyer sighed and took the seat beside the bed. You were driving back from the Hayes property development. It was raining heavily. According to the police report, another driver lost control on the wet road and crossed into your lane. The collision was severe. The other driver? Mr. Thornton asked. She survived with minor injuries, Ms. Wang said. No charges were filed. It was ruled an accident. Dangerous conditions, no negligence. Mr. Thornton nodded slowly, absorbing this information. And my company? The executive team has maintained operations according to your contingency plans. Phillips has been acting CEO, with oversight from the board. There have been challenges, of course, but nothing catastrophic. Lynn listened quietly, struck by how different this conversation was from the intimate moments of care she had shared with Mr. Thornton. Here was a glimpse of his real life, a world of business deals, property developments, and corporate structures far removed from the quiet hospital room where she had bathed him and read to him for months. And personal matters? Mr. Thornton asked. Your ex-wife sent flowers when she heard about the accident, Ms. Wang replied. Your cousin Thomas called several times from Australia. A few close business associates have inquired regularly about your condition. Lynn couldn't help noticing that despite these mentions, no one except the lawyer had actually visited him during his 3 months in the hospital. This powerful man with his wealth and success had lain alone, with only paid professionals checking on him, as if reading her thoughts. Mr. Thornton's eyes drifted to Lynn. Only constant visitor was my nurse, he said, his voice softening. Talked to me every day. Ms. Wang looked at Lynn with newfound interest. The doctors mentioned your presence might have been beneficial to Mr. Thornton's recovery. Something about auditory stimulation helping to maintain neural pathways. Lynn nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. It's standard practice to talk to comatose patients. Research suggests it can help. She read to me, Mr. Thornton added. News books. Told me about her family. Her dreams. Lynn felt her face grow warm again. How much did he remember of those one-sided conversations? The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Ms. Wang providing brief updates on various business matters. Mr. Thornton listened attentively but declined to make any decisions, saying he needed time to fully recover first. Throughout the conversation, he frequently glanced at Lynn, as if making sure she was still there. When Ms. Wang finally left, promising to return the following week, Mr. Thornton visibly relaxed against his pillows, the effort of the meeting having clearly drained him. You should rest, Lynn said, approaching the bed to check his IV. Your physical therapy session is in 2 hours. Tired of resting, he replied with a hint of frustration. Been resting for 3 months. Lynn smiled despite herself. That wasn't rest, Mr. Thornton, that was a coma. Very different thing. He looked at her for a long moment, then asked, Why do you still call me Mr. Thornton? The question caught her off guard. It's professional. You're my patient. You've bathed me, moved me, read to me, he said simply. Told me your life story. I think we're past formalities. Call me Alex. Lynn hesitated, aware of the professional boundaries she needed to maintain, yet also aware of the unique connection they shared. I'll try, she said finally, but only when we're alone. In front of other staff or visitors, it has to be Mr. Thornton. Fair enough, he agreed. Then after a pause, you told me about your hometown. About wanting to build a clinic there. Lynn froze, surprised by the specific memory. You remember that? Parts. Fragments. He frowned slightly as if trying to piece together hazy recollections. No doctor for an hour's drive. Your uncle, health problems because of it. That's right, Lynn said softly, amazed at his recall. My Uncle Juan had diabetes that went undiagnosed too long because he kept putting off the long drive to see a doctor. Tell me more, Alex requested. About this clinic dream. It matters to you? Lynn hesitated, feeling strangely vulnerable now that her previously one-sided confidences had become a real conversation. But there was something in his expression, a genuine interest that made her continue. The town has grown a lot in the last decade, she explained, adjusting his blankets as she spoke. New families moving in, but the medical services haven't kept up. The nearest hospital is in Westridge, almost an hour away. For elderly people or families with young children, that's a real hardship. You want to change that, he observed. Lynn nodded. I've been saving since nursing school, but property costs are high, even in a small town. Then there's renovation, equipment, staffing. She sighed. It's just a dream for now. Dreams matter, Alex said, more firmly than he'd spoken all morning. They're what pull us back when it would be easier to let go. His words sent a chill through Lynn, a reminder of how close he had come to never waking up. Had her voice, her stories, her dreams really been part of what anchored him to life? I should check on my other patients, she said, suddenly needing some distance from the intensity of his gaze and the weight of his words. You'll come back? There was an unexpected vulnerability in his question. Of course, she assured him. I'm on shift until 7. As Lynn walked down the corridor, her mind was a whirl of confusing emotions. The line between professional care and personal connection had never felt so blurred. For months she had cared for an unconscious man, sharing her thoughts and dreams with someone who couldn't respond. Now that same man was awake, remembering her words, looking. 6 months after opening his eyes in room 312, Alexander Thornton stood at the window of his downtown penthouse, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over the skyline. The view was magnificent, a testament to the wealth he had accumulated over decades of shrewd business dealings. Yet instead of feeling the satisfaction that such a vista once brought him, he found himself thinking of a small town he had never visited, nearly 2 hours from the city limits. The recovery had been arduous. Weeks of physical therapy to rebuild muscles that had wasted during his months of immobility, speech therapy to regain full control of his voice, cognitive tests to ensure his brain functions were intact. Throughout it all, one face had remained constant, Lin Yu, the nurse whose voice had kept him tethered to the world when darkness threatened to pull him away completely. Even after his discharge from the hospital, they had stayed in touch. What began as weekly check-in, calls to monitor his recovery, had evolved into something neither of them had expected, a genuine friendship that crossed the boundaries of their different worlds. Alex took a sip of his tea, grimacing slightly at the bitter herbal taste. Another of Lynn's suggestions, traditional remedies her grandmother had sworn by for improving circulation. He drank it faithfully each evening, though he'd never admit to anyone else that he was following a nurse's home remedies instead of just taking the medications his high-priced doctors prescribed. His phone chimed with a message. Lynn confirming their meeting tomorrow. He had asked her to come to his office, saying he had a business proposition to discuss. It had taken weeks to convince her that it was a professional meeting, not a social one, and that the idea he wanted to share would benefit them both. Alex smiled at her message, formal and polite, still maintaining the professional distance she insisted on, despite the unique bond they shared. How strange that the person who knew his most vulnerable moments, who had cared for his unconscious body and spoken to him when no one else did, would be so careful about boundaries now that he was well again. The next morning, Alex arrived at his office early, reviewing the folders his assistant had prepared. When Lynn was announced, he stood to greet her, struck again by how different she looked outside the hospital setting. In her simple blue dress and light jacket, with her hair falling loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in a practical nurse's bun, she seemed both more approachable and somehow more distant, a reminder that their hospital relationship was firmly in the past. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Can I offer you coffee, tea? Coffee would be nice, she replied with a small smile. I just finished a night shift. Alex pressed the intercom and requested 2 coffees, then turned his attention back to Lynn. How are things at Mercy General? Busy, she said. We're short-staffed again. Budget cuts. She looked around his spacious office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive artwork. But you didn't ask me here to talk about hospital staffing issues. Direct as always, Alex said with a smile. One of the things I've always appreciated about you. Lynn raised an eyebrow. Always? You only properly met me 6 months ago. I met you long before I opened my eyes, he corrected gently. I heard you for months. Your voice was the most consistent thing in my world during that time. A slight blush colored her cheeks, something that happened whenever he referenced her one-sided conversations during his coma. You said you had a business proposition, she reminded him, clearly wanting to move the conversation to safer ground. The assistant arrived with coffee, giving Alex a moment to gather his thoughts. When they were alone again, he opened one of the folders on his desk. After our conversations about your hometown and its lack of medical facilities, I became curious. I had my team do some research. He slid some papers across to her. They confirmed everything you told me. The nearest hospital is 58 minutes away by car. The population has increased 22% in the last 5 years, largely young families and retirees. Demographics with higher medical needs. Lynn looked at the reports, surprise evident on her face. You researched my hometown? I did, Alex confirmed, and I found something else interesting. He passed her another document. That property you mentioned, the old building next to the pharmacy on Main Street, it's for sale. Has been for nearly a year. Lynn stared at the listing, then looked up at him with confusion. Why are you showing me this? You know I can't afford to buy it. Alex leaned forward, his expression serious. What would you say if I told you I want to fund your clinic? Lynn's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. What? I want to establish a medical foundation, Alex explained. The Alexander Thornton Health Initiative. Its first project would be a community clinic in your hometown, with you as the director. Lynn slowly set down her cup, her hands suddenly unsteady. Is this some kind of joke? I've never been more serious, Alex replied. The foundation would purchase and renovate the property, equip it to your specifications, and cover operating costs for the first 5 years. After that, if it's successful, we could implement a mixed funding model, partial community ownership, partnerships with regional hospitals, maybe some grant funding. But why? Lynn asked, clearly struggling to process his offer. Why would you do this? Alex was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. During my recovery, I've had a lot of time to think about my life. I built a real estate empire worth billions, but for what? When I was lying in that hospital bed, none of it mattered. No one came to visit except my lawyer, discussing business I couldn't care less about. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he had helped shape with his developments. I've spent 30 years accumulating wealth that brought me no real joy. When I was in the coma, drifting in that darkness, it wasn't thoughts of my buildings or my bank accounts that kept me here. It was a nurse who took the time to talk to me, to share her dreams of making a difference in her community. He turned back to face her. You gave me something I hadn't had in a very long time. A connection to another human being that wasn't based on what I could do for them or what they wanted from me. You cared for me as a person, not as Alexander Thornton, CEO of Thornton Developments. Lynn's expression softened, but she still looked uncertain. This is too much. You don't owe me anything for doing my job. This isn't about owing, Alex insisted. It's about purpose. About using my resources for something meaningful. Your clinic could serve thousands of people who currently have to travel hours for basic medical care. It could quite literally save lives. He returned to his desk and opened another folder. I've had preliminary designs drawn up based on what I remember you describing. 4 examination rooms, a small laboratory, a welcoming waiting area. He spread out the architectural renderings. Of course, these would just be starting points. You would have final say on everything. Lynn looked at the drawings, her professional interest clearly piqued despite her reservations. She leaned forward, studying the layout. The lab is too small for the equipment we'd need, she murmured, almost to herself. And there should be a separate entrance for emergency cases. Alex smiled, watching her mind already begin to improve on his architect's work. So you're interested? Lynn looked up, seeming to catch herself. It's a beautiful dream, but But what? People will talk, she said bluntly. A wealthy businessman suddenly funding a clinic run by the nurse who cared for him during his coma? It looks inappropriate. Let them talk, Alex replied with a shrug. I've been the subject of gossip for most of my adult life. It comes with success. It's different for me, Lynn said quietly. I've worked hard to be taken seriously as a professional. If people think I somehow manipulated a vulnerable patient, Alex leaned back in his chair, studying her. You're worried about your reputation, wouldn't you be? She challenged. Fair point, he conceded. Then let's make it completely above board. The foundation will have a proper board of directors, medical professionals, community leaders, business people with relevant experience. All funding will be transparent with proper oversight. You'll be hired as director based on your qualifications, with a committee reviewing the appointment. Lynn still looked hesitant. And what about us, whatever this is? She gestured vaguely between them. What do you want it to be? Alex asked gently. The question hung in the air between them. Lynn's eyes met his, searching. I don't know, she admitted finally. When you were my patient, the boundaries were clear. Now everything feels complicated. Life is complicated, Alex said with a small smile. But some things are simple. I respect you. I value your vision and your compassion. I want to help make your dream a reality, because it's a good dream that will help many people. He leaned forward. The foundation is happening regardless. I've already started the legal work. The question is whether you want to be part of it. Lynn was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the outline of the clinic on the architectural drawings. Can I think about it? Of course, Alex said. Take all the time you need. 2 weeks later, they stood together on Main Street in Lynn's hometown, looking at the old building that would soon become the town's first medical clinic. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching beneath their feet as locals passed by, casting curious glance.